Very recently I made a video responding to Rationality Rules' video on veganism, and I received quite a lot of comments on it, with the vast majority being very positive. It was actually really nice for me. I got a lot of external validation to see the video going down so well, so thanks for your comments and engagement with that video. But there were a few other comments that inspired me to make a quick follow-up, just clarifying a few things. So here we go. So the first thing I want to talk about relates to the comment Stephen made about the term unnecessary and the harm vegans cause in purchasing plants.
How does the vegan determine that their life is worth more than the mice and moles sacrificed in their crops? If the avoidance of harm is so paramount, why does one human life supersede 1,000 mice or 1,000,000 insects?
I responded to that last comment Stephen made by saying, but I'm pretty sure that most vegans wouldn't subscribe to the belief that one human life supersedes countless non-human animals' lives. No, it is in fact non-vegans who would be more likely to believe such nonsense. So for starters, as a few of you pointed out, I think it's true that I did not explain why I don't think most vegans don't subscribe to this notion that Stephen put forward. You know, I completely disagree with his claim about vegans presuming that one human life supersedes that of infinite harm to infinite beings. But I didn't choose to focus my video on why precisely I and other vegans don't subscribe to this belief but still buy plants. A few commenters made the point that regardless of what I and other vegans say, it can be argued that our behaviour implies that we think our lives are more important than the animals who are killed in crop production. So how do I justify that? You know, if I'm saying that we ought to reduce harm, how do I justify continuing to buy crops that do cause harm? A few people pointed out that if I really want to be consistent and if I really want to reduce harm, then surely I should kill myself to reduce causing further harm in the production of crops. Well, I do have a few things to say on that. In this particular case, I'm not actually convinced that starving or killing myself would lead to a world with less overall harm. While the decision to kill myself would also cause harm, right? Back me up here. But seriously, I do think that in these hypotheticals, people seem to often forget of the suffering caused by suicide. But anyway, I believe that by remaining alive, I and other ethically minded people have an enormous opportunity to reduce more harm overall. We can use our careers, our spare time, and our money to make the world a better place over our lifespan. And I think that encouraging people to move in a more ethical direction, both in terms of their consumption behaviours and in terms of how they use their spare time and resources, would lead to a better world compared to encouraging people to uninstall life because of the harm caused by their consumption of plants. And secondly, I think we often don't act in accordance with our ethical beliefs for reasons such as acrasia. So it could hypothetically be the case that I don't think my life is more important than the animals that I'm killing from purchasing crops, but that I still continue to live my life because, as I said in my previous video, I often act ethically inconsistently. Like that time where I stood in my flatmate's bedroom holding a huge knife to scare him because I thought it was funny. Although maybe the pleasure that I felt when I did that outweighed his suffering. So in short, if it is the case that uninstalling my life would lead to a better world, then I think I ought to do it. Now, whether or not the suffering that I and others would experience from me doing that would outweigh the suffering of the small animals that are killed in crop production is an open empirical question, and honestly one that's going to be really difficult to answer, given the problems you run into when you try to make these kind of calculations where we're comparing the experiences of these different beings. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm convinced that whichever option leads to more suffering overall is a situation that I think ought not be the case. And this simply follows from a system of ethics that is based on prioritizing suffering. Of course, that doesn't mean that I necessarily will do what I think I should do, because I'm selfish in many ways. A fact not too surprising given our Darwinian background. I guess this links to what I was saying in the previous video about how I don't see morality as this black and white thing where if I'm vegan I've reached some ethical line that doesn't warrant any further moral growth. No, as I said in my previous video, I think that we are all doing many ethically good things and many ethically bad things, and we can always strive to move our line towards a more ethical location. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly actually, I'm just not convinced that uninstalling my life would lead to a better overall world. I think that we can use our time on this planet to make this place a better place to live. I don't think the world would be a better place if I starved myself to prevent harming small animals in crop production. And it's worth remembering that there is an unspeakable amount of suffering happening on this planet that isn't caused by humans. Another point I want to quickly make is that when we're discussing crop deaths, it seems that we fail to consider the suffering and death that would take place on that piece of land in the absence of humans. We live in a complicated and messy world, and it's not even obvious that planting more crops is leading to more suffering overall. And there's also variation between different types of crops. If you want more information on this, then I would recommend checking out this article by Brian Tomasic. And just to reiterate, here are two clips that I think highlight what I'm seeing as the key mistake in Rationality Rules' video.
Utilitarians then affirm the first premise of the ethical vegan argument. To unnecessarily harm sentient beings is to minimize happiness and maximize suffering. However, I think that utilitarians are subtly but significantly mistaken in their assessment. Bentham died in 1832, 27 years before Darwin published The Origin of Species, but we today are so fortunate as to stand on the shoulders of both of these giants. Our ancestors that inherited the don't unnecessarily harm your kin .intuition patch had a survival advantage over those who didn't. The same is true of those who inherited the don't unnecessarily steal from your kin .intuition patch. Now, while most social species simply run the script and get on with their life, never questioning why they have the intuition, in recent millennia humans have been asking why. Why do we have this intuition? What is morality? What is this standard? What makes something right or wrong? And ethical veganism is, by my lights at least, the result of answering this question in the tone resembling Bentham. The subtle but significant issue though, and here's where my second objection begins, is that I think that ethical vegans, and indeed utilitarians, have misdiagnosed our moral software. We're not running the patch "we shouldn't harm sentient beings unnecessarily." No, definitely not. We're predators, for crying out loud. We're running the patch "we shouldn't harm our kin unnecessarily."
He obviously understands that we can't look at what is in order to conclude what ought to be. But at the same time, he sometimes argues as if vegans and utilitarians are incorrect in our ought statement exactly because it is not in line with empirical evidence for the origins of our moral intuitions. But how can you say that an ought statement is the wrong ought statement because it's not in line with what is? The ought statement isn't beholden to what is. The way utilitarians want the world to be is not incorrect or a misdiagnosis because it is not in line with the empirical claims that Rationality Rules is making about why our moral intuitions evolved. In all honesty, I don't think Rationality Rules is very clear in his video at all. At times, he acts as if he's just offering an explanatory argument as to why humans behave the way they do. But then he also talks about how Jeremy Bentham had this idea of utilitarianism, but that this was before Darwin, as if he thinks evolution is somehow helpful in determining our values. As if only Bentham had lived to read Darwin's On the Origin of Species, he would have realised that he didn't really want to maximise well-being, and that wanting that would be a misdiagnosis. But we don't have to, and indeed should not, make it our goal to listen to evolution. Evolution is just something that happens. There's no intention behind it. Evolution doesn't want anything. The processes we refer to as evolution are just complicated chains of cause and effect that work to sustain the replication of genes. In other words, evolution doesn't give a damn whether this world is a good place to live. But I, as a sentient creature capable of experiencing suffering and pleasure and heat and sweat, am of the strong opinion that we should. So that's all I wanted to say, just a quick follow-up video on the Rationality Rules stuff. A big thank you once again to my Patreon team for making all of this possible. I really do appreciate it. And what I'm doing at the moment, if you're interested, is I'm splitting my time between making YouTube videos but also focusing on the documentary project that's been in the works for a few years now. And over the next few months, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on that project. And hopefully very soon, I'll be able to show you a trailer using footage from the documentary to give you a taste of what's to come. With that said, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with another video.